And welcome back. My next guest is Russell Hatley, a Korean War Army veteran. Welcome, Russ.
Welcome to you. Thank you.
So, Russ, I'm delighted to have you here on the program. And as you know, it's important, I think, for our young folks and for our community to know a little bit about our veterans. And so you're our veterans segment for this, our 33rd episode of Hometown Happenings. So, Russ, let's talk a little bit about your background and
Okay.
where you're from, where you were born.
Newark, New Jersey.
And how long did you live down in Newark?
I lived there until I was probably 10, and then we moved to Roselle, which is another town in Jersey. And then I moved up here in, 1961.
1961, okay. So you've been living in New City pretty much since 1961?
For 65,
Okay.
I moved to New City. I'm still in the same house.
Well, okay. So, Russ, let's talk a little bit about just your growing up. I mean, how big was your family? And
I was the only child.
Only child, okay. And then you ended up getting into the Army. How did that transpire?
I was going to school, college, and I would not have had to go, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I dropped out of school knowing I would get drafted, and I did right away and wound up in Korea.
So what year roughly did you get drafted into the Army?
1952.
1952. So you went in about the middle part of the...
Yeah, I was there when it ended, when
Okay.
the truce was signed.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about your time in the Army. So when you dropped out of college, you got drafted. Where did you do your basic training?
Fort Breckenridge, Kentucky.
Right. And what was that like?
That was 16 weeks, and it was kind of boring.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not boring, but nothing to write home about, put it that way.
Right.
And then,
So after Fort Breckenridge and you went through basic, did you go to Korea right away? Or,
Yeah.
Right away.
about
What-
half the company that I was in basic went to Korea or the Far East, and the other half went to Europe.
Okay. So you went over to Korea right away. What unit were you in the Army?
The 3rd Division,
Okay.
7th Regiment,
Mhm.
Charlie Company.
Okay. So that 3rd Division, was that Patton's old group or no?
No.
No? Oh, that was 3rd Army. I'm sorry. 3rd
Yeah.
Army, World War II, 3rd Division. Talk to us a little bit about your time in Korea. So how long were you there for?
Well, I was, Korea had a point system. You got 4 points a month if you were in the infantry, and 36 points you could go home.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there and didn't have the 36 points. I had, I think, 24 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent the whole time in Korea.
Okay.
I went in 52 and got out in 54, and except for basic, the whole time was in Korea.
Right. And you saw combat in Korea.
Yes.
Could you speak to us a little bit about some of your time in combat in Korea?
Well, it was, I wasn't there when they had the big push up to the Yalu River and then, the bad winter and all. When I was there, we mostly lived in bunkers on a hill and a big valley in the middle. On the other side was the Chinese and North Koreans. And we would go out at night on patrols, and they would go out at night on patrols and look for each other. But then right before the truce was signed, there was an attack, and it broke through it was a Korean division, and we were put in to stop, that. And that's where we were when the war ended. And that's where we moved back about a mile and set up positions, and they're still there today.
Wow. So that's right by the. Were you right by the DMZ?
It was the DMZ, and I think I just heard on the television they have 32,000 men still there.
Wow. So you went over in 52, and the war ended in
53, July
53. So you were and could you talk to us just a little bit about some of the so your experiences while you were there, while you were in combat, I mean, were they, without having to get into too much detail, you can share as much as you'd like, but you know, do you keep in contact with any of the guys, you know, that you served with?
You know, when we came home, I came home with 6 or 7 guys from the company, and we went to New York because we got out in Camp Kilmer in Jersey. We went to New York. We had 3 days before and we made a thing that we would meet there every day forever, and we never did.
No.
But I kept in touch with some of, you know, a couple of the guys. But most of them were, the only ones that I kept in touch with were the guys from Jersey and New York, who I, you know, could see without too much trouble. But
Right, right. And what rank did you attain in service?
I was a corporal at one point, and then lowered to a.
Yeah.
Well, we won't go into that part. After the what they did when there was a truce, they moved us back, and they started basic training. We marched, and you know, I mean, and it was kind of tough to do. And then new guys came in, you know, and so that was a terrible time. I mean, it was just, you know, the war was over, and there we were marching and going to a rifle range again, and it's just, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been one thing to be involved in combat for the better part of a year, and then eventually to just have that stop, and then then you're basically just training.
Well, yeah, we did nothing.
Right, and it was a truce. It wasn't really a, you know, it's still a truce.
It's still a truce today.
To this day, so it's really not a, you know, wasn't really a formal surrender. So that's why there are 32,000 troops that are still there, and that's why there's been the combat readiness, you know, to this day, where the United States every two to 3 months does war games and drills, you know, where they're bombing mountains and.
I just heard they're talking about not having the practice with South Korea this summer.
Right. So, you know, we're filming this actually on the day when President Trump has just finished meeting with the North Korean dictator, you know, talking about path forward in Korea. It's interesting to be able to have a Korean War vet on the show. What do you think about the most recent developments with the discussions with North Korean
Well,
dictator?
I think it's a good idea. I really do. If it works out, I don't know. You know, who knows? But I think it's time to end the whole thing. And you know, not that they're fighting now, but you know, the threat and the threats back and forth and all. I think it's time to end it.
Right.
I think it's time to end all wars, but we won't go into that.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I not having served, but I've had three nephews serve in the military, and 2 of them saw combat in some significant action in Iraq with one, and one in Afghanistan. And it's life-changing. Your life was changed by the military and by some of the things that you, I'm sure, witnessed in combat. You know, Russ, let's talk a little bit about, so you got out of the Army, you know, you went on with your life. So what did you do when you got out of the Army?
I went back to school. I went to Rutgers on the GI Bill, and I graduated. And while I was going, I went to work. I went to school 3 days a week, because you could if you were a veteran at that time, and I worked 3 days a week. And when I got out of school and graduated, they had programs. You know, we went for employment, and I was making as much working 3 days a week as they were offering working 5 days a week. So I never used my diploma for anything. Then I was getting married, which was another thing.
Right.
And so I went into construction, and then there was I was doing spackling, sheetrock, and it was a development in Orangeburg at the time. It was called the Sixth Borough? Yeah, the Sixth Borough. And all the houses right along the parkway there. And the parkway ended.
I didn't know that. So the parkway just stopped there?
Yeah. And I worked there for a couple of years, and then my boss got a job at Johnson's Lane.
Oh, yeah, right here.
And we got sent up there, and I went up Brewery Road, and I was looking for Indians in the woods. I mean, there was nothing, you know. Yeah. And then I went into business for myself with another guy, and we built houses all over Rockland.
Well, that's great. And when did you end up? So you came to New City in '65.
Came in '61.
Oh, '61. Okay.
I moved up here because I was working up here, and rather than commute every day, you know, I moved to Spring Valley,
right,
and in an apartment, and one thing led to another.
So you were really here for the building boom of the
Yeah.
'60s. I
Yeah.
mean, the Tappan Zee Bridge opened, Rockland County's population exploded, and you helped build a bunch of the houses that people ended up moving up here, you know, to occupy, you know, with the advent of suburban Rockland, which is a great story. Your wife, how long were you married? Do you have kids?
I have 3 kids, and I was married. Well, my wife died 22 years ago.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
And I have 3 kids. One's 2 grandsons, and my youngest son, who's 43 now, has Down syndrome.
Okay.
And he lives with me. He and I live together, and he works at O&R through ARC, and that's about it.
ARC is a great organization. Carmine is a wonderful executive director, probably one of the best in the whole county, and they're a great organization. We've had Carmine on talking about Arc of Rockland for a number of our shows, and I, of course, you may or may not know this, but I spent 21 years working with people with disabilities. I had been over at Rockland Independent Living Center as the exec. Before that, I was at Camp Venture as the chief operating officer. Prior to that, I was at Abbott House as the director of services for the developmentally disabled, and I started my career working for Catholic Guardian Society, developing and running some programs
Well,
for
you know
people.
all about the, you know,
Absolutely.
the disadvantaged or when Michael was born, ARC was just starting really, and they had a program up in Pomona, and there was no transportation. She had to drive him every day and, you know, pick him up, and it was the early intervention program, and I think it did a lot of good for him. I really do. But,
That's great.
and I think ARC is a pretty good outfit.
No, they really are. They really are. So, Russ, that's about all the time that we have for today. But
Okay.
I do want to thank you for being such a great guest, and I do want to thank you, you know, for not just being a great guest, but for your service to our country. You know, serving during wartime, and then building a life here in Clarkstown. It's folks like you that have kind of been the backbone and built our community in a time of mass expansion. And I want to thank you for, again, for being a great guest, but for your service to our country.
I want to thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Great. Thank you. So stay tuned. Our next guest is John Noto, Clarkstown Town Assessor, coming right up.